Hello and welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, poet, walker and author of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry. This is a podcast for people who suspect, as I do, that the world is moving too quickly and that something quietly extraordinary waits for anyone willing to slow down, listen closely and pay proper attention to it. In every episode, I share two poems. The first is a guest poem from the wider world of verse, something that has stayed with me or troubled me or refused to let me go. The second is one of my own, drawn from the fells, the coast, the weather, and the strange beauty of ordinary days. And for your chance to win a signed copy of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry, I invite you to suggest a future guest poem by emailing me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. The next guest poem will come from one of you. Today we are exploring a theme that has haunted my walks through the fells and my hours at the writing desk in equal measure. The surface is a lie that holds light. We tend to meet the world in its finished, polished state, the calm lake, the published poem, the charming face across the table at the inn. But beneath that thin veneer of visibility lies a weight of history, pressure of sediment, and a darkness that gives the light its meaning. Whether it's the abyssal depths of the ocean, the cold stilted floor of a mountain lake, or the lightless layers of the literary submission pile, we are always walking on a crust that hides a much larger truth. We are going to sit with that question tonight, beginning with Alfred, Lord Tennyson, and a creature held in ancient sleep beneath the abyssal sea, and then descending, in the second half, into the steep walls of Buttermere, a Lakeland valley with a dark history of imposture and a patient water waiting to claim what it can. So pour something warm, settle in, the wind is up, the light is going, and there is poetry to be found. To begin our journey into the depths, I want to share a poem that perfectly captures the terror and the majesty of what lies beneath the surface. This was requested by a listener who felt it captured the mystery of the unseen. It is The Kraken by Alfred Lord Tennyson, published in 1830. Below the thunders of the upper deep, far, far beneath in the abysmal sea, his ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep, the Kraken sleepeth, faintest sunlights flee about his shadowy sides, above him swell huge sponges of millennial growth and height, and far away into the sickly light, from many a wondrous grot and secret cell, unnumbered and enormous polypi winnow with giant arms the slumbering green. There hath he lain for ages, and will lie battening upon huge sea worms in his sleep, until the latter fire shall heat the deep. Then once by man and angels to be seen, in roaring he shall rise, and on the surface die. There is something profoundly unsettling and yet deeply beautiful about Tennyson's vision here. When we look at the ocean, we see the thunders of the upper deep, the waves, the whitecaps, the movement that catches the sun. But Tennyson immediately plunges us far, far beneath. He uses the word abysmal, not in the modern sense of very bad, but in its original sense, relating to the abyss, the bottomless void. Here the surface is not just a lie, it is a distance. The sunlight is faintest and it flees, it cannot survive the descent. This image of the Kraken battening or fattening on sea worms in a dreamless sleep suggests a prehistoric elemental force that is indifferent to the world above. We live our lives in the sickly light of the upper world, unaware of the enormous polypi and the millennial growth happening beneath our feet. The Kraken represents the truth that is too large to be seen. It is only at the end of time, the latter fire, that the creature rises. Tennyson suggests that for the truth to reach the surface, the world as we know it must end. The Kraken dies upon the surface because the surface cannot sustain the weight of such a deep truth. It is a haunting metaphor for the secrets we keep and the histories we bury. When I think of the North Yorkshire coastline, the dark North Sea, I often think of what lies in the silt, the shipwrecks, the lost villages, the ancient forests submerged by the rising tides. We look at the horizon and see a flat blue line, but that line is a lie. It is a lid on a boiling ancient pot of mystery. Tennyson reminds us that we are guests on a very thin crust of reality. Moving from the abysmal sea to the high enclosed waters of the Lake District, I want to share a poem of my own. This piece was born out of a walk during a particularly heavy autumn rain, when the landscape felt less like a scenic vista and more like a closing fist. Buttermere, as many of you will know, is one of the smaller lakes in the Western Lake District, ringed by High Stile, Red Pike and Robinson, fells that rise sharply on every side, leaving the valley floor in shadow long before the rest of the district has lost the light. It's photographed in calendars and on shortbread tins as one of the most beautiful places in England, and that's true, but it's also, by some quiet margin, one of the most claustrophobic. On a wet October afternoon, with the clouds sitting low on the ridges, the valley does not feel discovered. It feels entered. The walls crowd in. The light withdraws. The water, which in summer photographs looks like a mirror, begins to look more like a vessel. There is also a darker history in this valley, and it sits beneath the poem, whether the listener knows it or not. In 1802, a man calling himself the Honourable Augustus Hope arrived in Buttermere and married a young local woman, Mary Robinson, known then and ever since as the Beauty of Buttermere. He turned out to be a John Hatfield, a forger and bigamist with several other wives still living. He was hanged at Carlisle in 1803. The case captivated Wordsworth, Coleridge and the early tourist trade alike, and it left Buttermere with a quiet stain, the first picturesque place in England to be exposed as a setting for imposture. The forged name in the inn's ledger is a real document, and it's still there. So when I walked the valley that autumn afternoon, with the rain pulsing and the scree drifting and the cold brim of the lake inching upward, I wasn't only walking through weather, I was walking through a place where the surface has historically held a lie. The poem that came out of it tries to hold all of that at once, the mechanical facts of the geology, the gravitational hunger of the lake, and the older human story of the signature that should not have held the light. Here is my poem, Buttermere. The walls crowd in, hoarding the sudden dark, High Stile and Robinson shouldering out the sky. It feels less like a valley than a trap, where the wind is throttled in the rocky gill to fracture the reflection of the scar. It is the vessel for everything falling, the constant granular drift of the scree, the slate slipping its hold to find the floor. It swallows the debris without a sound, packing the sediment in the lightless cold. There is a history of imposture here, a beauty that masks the depth of the drop. Like the forged name signed in the inn's ledger, the surface is a lie that holds the light, while the silt buries the truth in the black. The rain pulses. The cold brim inches up, stealing the roots of the larch, the stone of the track. Patient, heavy water waiting to reclaim the narrow edge we thought was safe to walk. When I wrote this, I was thinking about the physical weight of the mountains, High Style and Robinson, and how they seem to push the light out of the valley. Buttermere is a place of immense beauty, but it is also a place of great geological and historical tension. The line, "The surface is a lie that holds the light," is the heart of this poem. On a calm day, the lake is a perfect mirror, a silver sheet that reflects the fells and the sky. It looks solid, almost like you could walk across it. But that reflection is a fracture, it's a mask. Beneath that silver is a lightless cold that is swallowing the debris of the mountains. I also touched upon the history of imposture. This refers to the famous story of Mary Robinson, the maid of Buttermere, and the man who wooed her under the forged name of Alexander Augustus Hope. He was actually John Hatfield, a conman and bigamist who was eventually hanged. He signed the inn's ledger with a lie, just as the lake signs the valley with a beautiful reflection that masks the depth of the drop. In my walks through the Yorkshire and Cumbrian landscape, I am constantly reminded that nature is not pretty, it is powerful and often deceptive. The narrow edge we walk on, the tracks, the paths, is only ours for a moment. The water is patient, it is waiting to reclaim the land. This poem is a reminder to look past the reflection, to acknowledge the silt and the sediment of our own lives, and to realise that the beauty we see is often just a thin layer of light caught on the surface of something much deeper and much darker. And now it's on to our discussion segment this week, which is the art and patience of submitting to literary journals. The theme of the surface being alive does not stay on the fells. It walks back down into the valley, follows you home, and sits at the desk where you do your work. The professional life of a poet is a study in surfaces. When you see a collection of poetry on a bookshop shelf or a polished literary magazine on a coffee table, you are seeing the surface. You are seeing the light that has been caught and held. What you do not see is the sediment, the years of rejection, the endless revisions, the morning emails that begin "Thank you for letting us read your work," but on this occasion, for every poem that holds the light, there are hundreds packed down into the lightless cold beneath it. The journal you admire was not built on the poems it accepted. It was built on the poems it turned away. For many emerging writers, the world of literary magazines feels like Tennyson's abysmal sea, dark, mysterious, and a little terrifying. The Kraken's uninvaded sleep is, I think, an unusually accurate description of how a submission feels once you've sent it. It goes down into the deep. It vanishes from your control, and then you wait, sometimes for months, in the ancient, dreamless silence of the slush pile. But it's also, paradoxically, where the work grows. Submission is not the punishment that follows the writing, it is part of the writing. So I want to talk practically tonight about how to survive it, how to make peace with it, and how to recognise that the patient water is not your enemy. The first rule is research. You must find the grot and secret cell where your work belongs. Do not send your first poems to the biggest names, the Paris Review, Poetry Magazine, the London Magazine, simply because you've heard of them. Those journals receive tens of thousands of submissions a year, and an unknown poet sending unfocused work into that flood is essentially sending a message in a bottle into the abyss. You must find the journals that resonate with your specific voice. If you write about landscape, look at The Clearing, Orion, Earthlines, or Caught by the River. If you write more experimental verse, grantor, the White Review, or PN Review. If you write the strange, the lyrical, the ghosted, look at Strix, Magma, or Bathmag. There is a journal for almost every kind of voice, and the editors of small journals are often the most attentive, the most generous, and the most likely to write back. Build your career from the smaller waters first. The bigger lakes will still be there when you're ready. The second rule is patience, and patience is a much harder discipline than it sounds. Most journals take anywhere from 3 to 9 months to respond. In that time, your poem sits in a digital silt waiting to be discovered, and you are left at the surface trying to remember what you wrote and why. It's easy in those months to feel like the Kraken, forgotten in the depths, surrounded by indifference, beginning to doubt that you ever had a voice worth lifting up. But the waiting is essential. It separates the ego from the work. The poem you submitted in March is not the poem you would write in October, and the editor's silence is, in a strange way, giving you the gift of distance from your own writing. By the time the response arrives, whether that's acceptance or rejection, you are reading the poem with newer eyes, and you are better placed to know what it actually was. Treat rejection not as a failure, but as the constant, granular drift of the scree. It's part of the landscape. Every no is a piece of slate slipping its hold, making room for the yes that will eventually stick. I have a spreadsheet of my own rejection. It's a longer document by quite some margin than any of my published collections, and looking at it now, I'm almost grateful for every entry on it. The poems that were rejected because they were not yet what they needed to be. The journals were not gatekeeping, they were being honest. And the silence of those months was not contempt. It was simply the time the work needed to settle. A few practical suggestions then for the work itself. Keep a detailed record of every submission, the date, the journal, the poem sent, the response, the date of the response. Use tools like Submittable or Duotrope if they help, but don't let them become an obsession. Checking the status of a submission 3 times a day teaches you nothing the journal can't tell you in its own time. Read the journals you're submitting to. Actually read them. Buy a copy, sit with it, learn its register. Editors can tell within 30 seconds whether a submission has come from someone who has read the magazine or simply someone who has only Googled it. Few things are more frustrating to a small press editor than receiving work that clearly does not belong on their pages. And few things are more thrilling than receiving work that clearly does. Write a clean, brief cover letter, 3 or 4 sentences, your name, the titles of the poems, a single line of biographical context if relevant, a thank you. Don't explain the poems, don't justify them, don't preempt the editor's reading. Your cover letter should be the narrow edge, brief, polite, professional, and trusting the work to do the rest. If the surface is a lie that holds the light, then the poem is the only truth you have. It must be strong enough to survive the pressure of the depths without a covering note to defend it. Remember, the editors are human. They are tired. They are reading the 100th poem of the afternoon. They are looking for the moment that fractures the reflection, the line, the image, the turn of phrase that makes them sit up and read again. Your job is not to dazzle. Your job is to be the poem that, at 4 o'clock on a wet Tuesday, gives a tired editor a reason to keep reading. Quiet, precise, honest work tends to do that better than loud work. And remember, finally, that rejection is almost never personal. Most of the time it means the journal had already accepted 3 poems that month with similar themes to yours. Sometimes it means the editor was simply not in the right mood. Sometimes it means your poem arrived on a day when the entire submission queue was being read with weather-fatigued eyes. The opacity of the process is genuinely awful, but it's rarely a verdict on your worth as a writer. When the acceptance does come, and it will, if you are patient and you keep submitting, it feels exactly like Tennyson's latter fire. The Kraken rises. Your poem at last is by man and angels to be seen, and there is a real joy in that moment. Permit it, celebrate it, tell your friends, buy a contributor copy and put it on your shelf. But also know that the acceptance is just the surface. The real work, the millennial growth, happened while you were waiting in the dark. The publication is the moment that the world finally sees the iceberg. The iceberg itself was made over years, in the lightless cold, by your willingness to keep writing when no one was reading. So don't be afraid of the lightless cold of the submission queue. It's not a punishment. It is the place where the sediment of your craft is being packed down into something dense, something solid, something that will eventually shoulder out the sky. The surface is a lie that holds the light, but beneath it, if you are patient, the real work is always settling into stone. And so we come to the end of another walk together. We have stood with Tennyson on the surface of the abysmal sea, knowing that something ancient and patient lay beneath us in the dark, and we have descended into the steep walls of Buttermere, where the lake holds its imposture quietly, and the water waits with terrible patience to reclaim the narrow edge. The surface, as we said, is a lie that holds the light. But poems are the opposite kind of object. Poem is an honest descent. A poem is the silt brought up into language, examined, and offered to another mind without disguise. So now I would love to hear from you. If there is a poem you would like featured in a future episode, a classic, something modern, or a personal favourite you have carried with you for years, please email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. My email is confirmed in the episode description. Every suggestion is entered into the draw for a signed copy of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry, sent to you by hand. The next guest poem will come from one of you, and that is precisely how I want this podcast to work. Not as a polished surface offered across the silence, but as an honest descent made together. So thank you for listening, for slowing down with me, and for being willing to look beneath what holds the light. Until next time, may you find poetry waiting for you in the everyday.